Welcome to the Zachrilege Cast podcast, YouTube video, interview program that features me usually talking to some of the best and brightest in the atheist slash secular slash awesome community. Sometimes I just talk. This is episode 238. I'm recording this on January 7th, 2021. Thank you to Corey Johnston for being on last week. 2 weeks ago, 2 Star Wars movies ago, last episode. I do not have a guest to start the year, but I do have one lined up for next week. So, in your face, Flanders. I thought instead I would do a bit on the 58 books I read last year. I get my books usually from the library and sometimes audio, sometimes, read the words. So one morning I thought, I'm going to do a stream of consciousness recollection of the books I read this year. I keep a Google Doc of them, so I have a record of every book I read last year, and I can go back and see the ones I bought, the ones I got from the library, and such. But I don't write descriptions of them, usually. So I thought, well, what can I get out of these books? Just stream of consciousness, not looking up anything on Amazon. And amazingly, there are only like a couple of books that I totally 100% did not remember. But I thought of advice from a friend of mine who used to do social media for a brewery. They get a lot of social media comments, and a negative comment can really tank things. So his advice to people was, if you do post about a beer you drank on Untapped and you don't like it, just don't give it a ranking. So you just don't give it a ranking instead of, you can give a ranking of beer, but 0 to 5 stars basically. And instead of ranking it, don't do it. You can make a comment if you want, but if you want a record of all the beers you've had and not say something negative, if you don't have anything good to say, don't say anything at all, kind of thing. So I just thought, as someone who's tried to write books and how much work that has taken to write the crappy stuff I came up with, people who actually have gotten published and have to go through all that work for someone to go online, no matter how unlikely it is that they ever find this, to have me say, I don't remember this book you spent all this time working on, would be a terrible thing to do. So in those rare cases, I did go to Amazon and fill in the details of a little bit of a plot. So I'm going to just do quick recollections of every book I read last year. Now note, I don't know how long this is going to take. I doubt it's going to take very long because I only wrote a few sentences about each book at most, even the ones that were super ass long. 2 audiobooks I read this year were like in the 50-hour range, and a normal book's like 10, maybe. Like I just finished Dune as my first 2021 book, and that was 21 hours, which is a long ass book. Your fault, Chris. There's what, sequels? Oh God. Anyway, so let's start. Watching Porn and Other Confessions. So this is the only author, I think, of the year that had a fake name or not a complete name. So author Lindsay G is like me reading this book, really interested in the subject, but worried someone will look over my shoulder and see me reading about porn. The shame. It's about a writer who discovers the business, starts writing about it, going to conferences, when people did that sort of thing, and thinking about what it means, like thinking about the industry, how it treats people, and how it ultimately is a business for most people. She Said by Jodi Kantor. One theme of 2020 reading was shitty men and how they have been enabled. This is about the attempts of journalists to get women to go on the record regarding Harvey Weinstein, and how even the journalists are at risk by doing so, sometimes by their own employers. The Duchess Deal, Tessa Dare. I follow a few romance writers on Twitter and thought, hey, there's a genre I don't read a lot, or ever. Let's see, Rich Duke has to get married and have an heir, but he's disfigured due to a war wound. He's, of course, a chiseled dude other than that, and sensitive as well. And the woman he agrees to marry is one of those, I don't know how hot I am, and it's the 18th century, but she thinks like someone from the 20th century type stories. And basically the romance writing like 101 is 2 characters find out they're super hot for each other, and they don't really beat around the bush. They just get to the sex. They just get to it. but there has to be some kind of issue between them that breaks them up, and then they get together in the end. And this is part of a series, of course, because I think every book is now part of a series. The Halifax Explosion by Ken Cuthbertson. So we went on a cruise at the end of 2019. Yeah, I remember those. And we visited the Canadian port town of Halifax, and all the tour guides said, "Did you hear about the giant explosion that happened during World War I?" No. As a matter of fact, I had not. So this book tells the tale about an explosion that happened toward the end, and this was a total accident, toward the end of World War I. That was the largest explosion recorded until the nuclear bomb dropped. So yeah, it's an interesting story about what happens and how the town reacted and how people reacted to this disaster that it's weird that people don't know about it. But, you know, what are you going to do? Black Free Thinkers, Christopher Cameron. I'm a dirty heathen, and I remain fascinated by people who are in minority groups and open about not only their own atheism, but the fact that there were lots of black humanist leaders over the course of time. So 2 books on that theme this year. Please check them out. The Regrets, Amy Bonifants. This is a romance story about a woman who has a relationship with a ghost. Okay, it's not really a ghost, it's a guy who has died, but due to afterlife bureaucracy, has to live on Earth for 90 days in which he is told expressly to not get involved with the living. Guess what he does? It's oddly touching. Bomb by Steve Schenken. As I was looking for something else in my library app, I found this tale of the making of the atom bomb in America. And I think I may have a couple books on that theme this year. What a shock. Sidewalk Saint, Philip DePoy. This is the 4th book in a series about an amateur sleuth and child protective officer who finds a missing girl with special skills in 1970s Florida. Could this be Daryl? Zero History, William Gibson. A tale about somewhat futuristic tech and traveling around the world and causing chaos. Hidden Figures, Margot Lee Shetterly. The tale behind the Oscar bait movie from a few years ago. Black woman helped us go to the moon. It's true, and there isn't a white knight character that helped them get a more conveniently located bathroom. Obviously, there's a lot more to the book than to the movie, so you should check it out. Dead Astronauts, Jeff Vandermeer. Or Vandermeer? I don't know. Felt like I was completing a dare and finishing this. Okay, so maybe the whole, if you have not something nice to say nothing at all. So the plot of this book is some astronauts on a weird planet do weird things and die, and I really had trouble following the plot. So I'm going to say that's a problem on me. Button Man, Andrew Gross. My Cat has a sequel to this book called Butt on Face. It's a historical thriller about the birth of organized crime in 1930s New York. You see, before it was unorganized crime, and sorry, I'm not a podcaster or a terribly conservative comedian, so I only get to make cat butt jokes, not political commentary. TV The Book, Alan Sepinwall. One of my favorite TV writers summarizes his favorite TV shows in history. If you like TV in the past half century, you'll know the hits from this list. It's largely from before streaming time, but still good stuff. And for the most part, you'll know the shows even if, the description will at least intrigue you. Permanent Record, Edward Snowden. A guy working as a contractor for the government discovers that the government is hiding some scary shit. Somehow ends up in Russia, and I'm torn about this guy. It's like another book a little later in that there's a lot of detail leading up to the time he gets to Russia, and oddly, once he gets to Russia, there's not much there. He couldn't live in the U.S. because he was about to get Assanged, but he has to be helping out Putin a little bit in his apartment in Russia. Plus, they won't let him leave. So, for this guy, no-win situation. Really interesting to hear about his story. It Can't Happen Here, Sinclair Lewis, a classic book about America going fascist around World War II era. What if somebody fascisty took over the U.S. In like late 1930s? Yeah, exactly. Red Rising, Pierce Brown. This is one of those sci-fi / fantasy books about a chosen one doing chosen one things. This was the beginning of a series, and I'm not even totally sure how I got in touch with this book, but I decided that, one book was enough. Becoming, Michelle Obama. I'm torn about the Obamas. I like the story. I like her upbringing, growing up in Southside Chicago, kind of in one of the last generations where a family was able to have one person work and make a living. And then about her meeting Barack Obama when she was a lawyer and he was a baby lawyer. And oddly, they were the outsiders. Like, Barack Obama managed to get a senatorial seat because a guy running decided to drop out, and he was the best of a field of unknown candidates. One term in, he decides to run for president, and all of a sudden, now they're the establishment, and they seem to be keeping progressive policies in bay and making a fuck ton of money in the process. So, worth your time. Heaven and Hell, Bart Ehrman. So, I tried to, I know, as the atheist is at it again. I tried to reach out to Bart Ehrman to get him on my show, and he declined. And I'm totally not bitter, even though I know I consumed more content than 99% of the people who interviewed him and asked the same 4 questions. This book is his latest, of course. Who knows? He seems to come up with a lot of books. This is about how the ideas of what heaven and hell are in Christianity have changed, and how hell really wasn't in the Bible, and the version of heaven that everybody thinks exists now wasn't really there and had to evolve. A very stable genius, Philip Rucker Carl Leonning. Did you know our president is a crook? This became a genre, and I read way too many of these books. Stop enabling terrible rich people. After the New Testament, Bart Ehrman. See, Bart, we could have cuddled together with some mint tea and binged the Queen's Gambit together. This is one of those learning course books with the weird orchestral music and fake clapping at the start of every chapter, like a pretend lecture series, and then they make these into like audiobooks that you can listen to. This is a deepish dive into what happened to Christianity after the books of the New Testament were written. Like, what happened between those books and the Christianity we know today. Becoming Eve, Abby Shava Stein, member of an ultra-Orthodox Jewish group who is supposed to be their next leader, instead discovers that she is trans. Another interview attempt thwarted, although all I did was send an email and never get a response. So I can't say that this author really turned me down, didn't get to know me, prejudged me based on my cisness. Destiny Republic, Candace Millard. I think this was about Teddy Roosevelt's story. Candace Millard, I had a couple of books of hers that I read this year. Good not historical fiction, nonfiction. It gets confusing, these terms. Humanists in the Hood, Sakivu Hutchinson. Tales of real, live black humanists in the U.S. and what they're doing to make the world a better place. Tried to get her in the show. Didn't quite happen. As always, the fault is totally on my side. The Witches Are Coming, Lindy West. The Hulu show about her life as a journalist and someone who's overweight and has been attacked online was good. I think there are 2 seasons of it. It's worth your time. This book is a series of stories about men acting terrible online. What a surprise. Barracoon Zora Neale Hurston. This is a series of interviews conducted in the 1920s with one of the last surviving American slaves. It is hard to follow at times. It's one of those things I'm glad was recorded before the clock ran out, about someone who actually lived as a slave but was alive 60 years later to kind of tell the tale. Hero of the Empire, Candace Millard. Hey, check it out. Historical, a nonfiction book about Winston Churchill's desire to be a war hero. So he goes to war in South Africa. It was kind of like the white people who'd taken over in South Africa fighting with England. He gets captured and escapes. It's a cool look at how legends get made, and I wish we were past the time of people going to war to help their political careers. Thank you, Trump. Maybe you ended this. Swastika Night, Catherine Berdokun. This is a short novel about Germany winning the war. This is an alt history book, and I think it's set like thousands of years in the future. The Thousand-Year Reich actually exists, and Germany wipes out any trace of other cultures, and how this does not lead to an amazing perfect Reich. Note that this book was actually written while Germany was on the upswing World War II, so it was like 1937-ish. So it's interesting to see there are a lot of books written about what happened if Germany won World War II, but this is actually written while it was still going on. The Fifth Risk, Michael Lewis. One of Lewis's nonfiction deep dives, this time into the great people who work for the government despite the leadership being absolute shite. And all the things the government does that you just don't think about, and all the good things it does. There's been this constant push about the government's bad and we should drown in a bathtub. And then you see all the stuff it did. And we might not have internet without it. We might not have a lot of military too. But it's a good read. Educated by Tara Westbrook. This is a nonfiction about a girl trying to escape a religious cult and get an education. Her dad was kind of a charismatic Christian, and she wanted to learn things, and he didn't think she should. He thought that she should work for him because she was actually more like a boy than his son, and how she got away. How to Be an Anti-Racist by Ibram X. Kendi. So this is talk about how anti-racists are raking in the bucks. I think this came up during the last episode of the show. They're not. This book is a bestseller, and it is influencing some educational movements. I like the aspect of racism as a marketing and people receiving racist messages all their lives and how they're going to struggle to reject the messages. Like, think about all the people yesterday at the Capitol. They just got a constant barrage of messages and kept finding more things that reinforced those messages. How do we get past that? Well, at least Kendi is going to give us some ideas. Earth by Robert Sawyer. I love this Canadian science fiction author and would be missing out if I didn't read at least one of his books this year, right? So this is a series of short stories, shockingly, set on Earth. And usually his stories are like slightly in the future, and he definitely has some interesting takes on technology and sometimes first contact with aliens and what it would be like. The Consuming Fire, John Scalzi. I think I like him on Twitter more than his books itself, although he writes solid sci-fi with snarky characters. This is a story about a universe in which there are unexplained wormholes that allow people to travel from planet to planet in the known empire. Yeah, every book set in space in the future has an empire. Weird, huh? Just get over it, I guess. But what happens when the space superhighways stop working? This is book 2 in the series, and it's a pleasant read. It's good to check out. It's brisk. Fighting for Space. Amy Shira title. This author also does the interesting Vintage Space YouTube channel. So I was looking for historical details behind the Apple Plus TV show For All Mankind, an alternate history TV show in which the Russians get to the moon first. And this channel showed up. So this is the story of the women who were kind of sort of given a shot and wanted to be part of America's first astronauts, but they weren't. They were all great pilots and never got a real shot, unless you consider the alternate universe of For All Mankind. Daring Greatly, Brene Brown. So this is an author who's made a living out of being your true self, out of being vulnerable, and she does a podcast. So hey, podcaster, some of us can afford to be vulnerable, and I say this is someone who isn't as vulnerable as I should be. Hey, you need to read at least one self-help book out of 60 in a year, right? Well, at least one good one. The Oppenheimer Alternative, Robert Sawyer. Look at that, I'm running into the loving arms of a Canadian again. In this book, Oppenheimer discovers that the Earth will be unlivable in about 100 years, and he tries to boost the world's space program as a result. There's a wild finish for this one that includes the craziest use of the Tunguska explosion that you'll ever see. I'll not spoil. The Color Purple, Alice Walker. My wife helped organize a literary event surrounding Alice Walker's 75th birthday recently, or a year or two ago. So I had to read the book. It's a mostly depressing story of a woman being treated poorly by her man in the 1800s and how shitty the U.S. was during slavery. It got better, they said. I'm your Huckleberry, Val Kilmer. I had to applaud the actor slash author for writing a different kind of memoir. I kind of wanted a straightforward story about him, but he was just thrust into stardom in the 80s, dated every woman he could, and he's a Christian Scientist. I think he might be the only person who takes it seriously. He's very... I don't even know what the word is, but if you read the book, you'll go, oh, wow. Anyway, Space by Robert Sawyer. And more stories in space, please. Hey, I want spoilers on what's going to happen to humanity, and sci-fi authors help me in that quest. Going Clear, Lawrence Wright. This is the story on Scientology, another crazy religion that has the advantage of coming into being with so much more ability to get the real stories of the creation from the uber-productive writer L. Ron Hubbard to the super powerful leaders of today who basically bullied the IRS into making them a nonprofit. The City and the Stars, Arthur C. Clarke. So he was one of my gateway drugs into a lifetime of loving science fiction. Now, I had looked up all of his books on my library app and thought I hadn't read this one before, but alas, this is a repeat. And you know what? You should read books, right? I don't think you have to read a book once and say, sorry, I can't ever read this again. It's like, okay, I listened to this song once and I'm done. A man living in a futuristic city in which people are happy to live lives of luxury controlled by an ancient computer intelligence decides there is more to life. We know the beats of The Chosen One, usually a dude storyline, but this is a fine example. Catch and Kill, Ronan Farrow. Hey, it's another book about men behaving badly, and Farrow inserts himself into the story as his efforts to look into Harvey Weinstein have him getting booted from a major network job, but he gets another one and is just fine. The New Testament, Bart Ehrman. I'm not stalking him, you're stalking him. I thought the vulnerability angle was a new one for getting a niche audience, but translating the creation of Christianity for a layperson audience is a neat trick. Plus, he's an atheist, and he's accepted by most biblical scholars, so there. The Four Agreements, Don Miguel Ruiz and Janet Mills. So this is a book that tries to be like a self-help book from the point of view of the civilization that was killed by the Spaniards in Mexico. But it read like a book translated from a foreign language into English, back into a different language, back into English, and filtered it through a you-can-do-anything self-help lens that made it tough to complete. I am a trooper. Titan, Ron Chernow. If your aim is to read as many books as in a year, do not pick up one that's a 47-hour audiobook that feels like the story of a person's life told in real time. Chernow famously did the Hamilton book that became the musical, so I looked for more books, and this might be the longest. It's the story of John D. Rockefeller, who became one of the richest people in the world by being an asshole and thinking that God made him better than other people. He was also somewhat charitable. Somewhat. Sea Wife, Amity Gage. So what is this? Just a novel, not a space opera about a terrible religious leader who was also a prolific author? It's the story of a family who decides to buy a boat. Okay, the husband does this. And they travel around South America getting into adventures and mainly making me not want to be on a boat. Too Much and Never Enough, Mary Trump. So I had to get my monthly dose of, yes, we decided this guy's qualified for president book. It's a tale of the Trump family by someone who is in the family and isn't needing the brand to make a living. This is what happens when we value making money over everything else. Some people with no soul get rich and do anything possible to be famous, and since they appear to be rich, we just go along with the charade until that they're actually good at anything. I can't read my own writing. True Story, Katie Reed Perry. 2 out of 3 novels. What's up with me? This is a set of interconnected stories about a woman being sexually assaulted and the rest of her life, although we're not sure what actually happened. And it does create a question as to what actually really happened. You like to get one of those, multiple points of view type of books, and then you put it together and figure out what you think actually happened. Like 2020. In Pieces, Sally Field. Listened to the audiobook while heading to Florida on a vacation, which turned into a mask-free hellscape. Actually, no, it was fine. This is a pretty standard bio about an actress who started in TV, finally got into movies back when that was a strange thing, and then we fast forward through about 30 years of her career, which is fine. Rodham, Curtis Sittenfeld? Here's another alt history book focusing on the 2016 presidential candidate with one what if from her life that changes everything, but not that much. The Stand, Stephen King. Again, I listened to a super long audiobook, and hey, this is the special edition of the book that King wrote, adding back some parts that he cut from the original. You know, it was probably fine without the parts. This is a long story about a plague, a president who denies it, but that's forgotten since a large percentage of the population dies as a result. We have a battle of good and evil, although good's also like good, believing in God, the Old Testament, mean and spiteful God, so I'm not sure who to root for. Okay, I'll go with good, but just this once. Lovecraft Country, Matt Ruff. I read this book just after the HBO series concluded. The series tried to tell a more cohesive story than the book, which tells kind of connected stories that sort of come together. It's science fiction with mainly black characters as our protagonists. I like the show better, although it made no sense at all at times, but maybe that's the point. They did change a lot of the male characters to female for the show and shoehorned in a subplot from Korea that didn't really fit, and a love story. And yes, they do acknowledge the fact that the author, Lovecraft, was really, really racist. Mother Night, Kurt Vonnegut. Book was recommended by a friend, so a German propagandist who works for an American spy agency goes back to the U.S. after the war, but struggles due to his past. Crimes and Misdemeanors, Jeffrey Toobin. Toobin's Crimes and Misdemeanors during a company Zoom call got more attention than the book, which is another telling of the Trump crime family's actions. The Good Lord Bird, James McBride. When I heard about the TV show with Ethan Hawke playing John Brown, I was super excited. The book and the show tried to throw in 20th century comedy into a story from the 19th, and it just didn't feel like it worked all the way. I liked Hawke going for it in the show, but it was almost too much of a good thing, even though he was kind of a supporting character. All the people involved in the Harper's Ferry raid were killed, but this story has a survivor who is a boy mistaken for a girl, which is supposed to show how black people had to live multiple personalities to survive at that time and this time. Time Shards, David Fitzgerald. When I had him on to talk about his books on Jesus mythicism, he mentioned this sci-fi trilogy that he was working on with his wife. In the first book, the world is thrown into chaos when different time periods get thrown together. You kind of have to read it to figure it out. Somehow a band of people get together to figure out what happened. It's certainly different than most science fiction / fantasy that you would read. Hiding in Plain Sight, Sarah Kendzior. I listened to her podcast Gaslit Nation, but it's so depressing, because it's about reality. Spoiler alert, so is America. It's another Trump is a crook story, but it's told from the point of view of Republican takeovers of American towns, cities, states, demolishing them, but somehow holding on to power as the American dream fades. The Naughty Holiday, Tiffany Rice. Yeah, it's another romance novel. In this one, a woman who runs a plant nursery decides to quote-unquote hire a client to stand in as her boyfriend for Thanksgiving with her family. But of course, in romance story tradition, she's hot but doesn't think she's hot, and so is the dude, and so they get to the boning right away. They create weird reasons not to be together, but you know how it's going to conclude. Say it with me. A happy ending. The Testaments, Margaret Atwood. So she wrote a sequel to The Handmaid's Tale before it became a reality in America. Whew, hell, she got it just under the nose. So there's a coup, I know, fiction, right? And a religious right group takes over most of America, and it's horrible for everyone. This is another book from the point of view of a few characters, including one of the quote-unquote ants who make this hellscape, then decides to try to unmake it. There's a little more hope in this edition, which is needed in 2020 coming to a close, and 2021, since that's when I wrote this little blurb. And that's it. Hey, it only took 26 minutes. So, quick live read. Good God, has there been a coup? I know it's just as dumb and simultaneously scary as we thought. Please check out Benjamin Dixon's live stream from January 6, 2021, because hashtag Black Twitter had thoughts about this, and they are always illuminating. If you want to support this show, be like Freethinker 215, Alan Marks, Hugh Man, Chris of the Postmodern Polymath Podcast, Larry, Daryl, and the other Daryl, and go to patreon.com/Zachrilege. With me being unemployed, I might actually start charging people again, but probably not for shows that I talk to myself. Follow me on Twitter at Zachrilege, like the Zachrilege Cast page on Facebook, and send all mail to zachrilege.cast@gmail.com. Thank you to Books for being awesome. Who's coming up? So next week I'm going to have Mandisa Thomas of the Black Nonbelievers to talk about the upcoming 10th anniversary conference. Note this will have a live in-person aspect and a distanced version. So you should be able to check this out no matter where you are and no matter what your comfort level is with actually interacting with other people. So until then, let's continue the conversation.